I've been hearing a lot of buzz lately about this big new defense bill that got signed into law earlier this month. It's the kind of bill that people talk about as a milestone for national security and military modernization. And while that might be true, there's one particular section that nobody seems to be talking about. It's not making headlines, it's not front and center in the press releases, but if you pay attention to the details, and especially if you're someone who buys ammo or cares about how the civilian supply chain works, this part matters a lot. We're talking about a real bill that was signed in early July 2025, just before Independence Day. The timing feels fitting, honestly. It's one of the most substantial defense spending packages in years, and when you dig into it, there's a very specific line under what's referred to as Title III that focuses on small and medium caliber ammunition. It outlines several funding streams, and when you start breaking them down, they point to one major conclusion. We're about to see a huge increase in ammunition production that directly impacts what's available to civilians. Let's start with the numbers. There's $100 million allocated to increase production of 5.56 NATO and 7.62 NATO rounds. These two calibers are widely used across both military and civilian platforms. So, at first glance, you might assume that money is going straight to military stockpiles. But here's the thing. The Lake City Army Ammunition Plant, which is responsible for producing a huge portion of this kind of ammunition, sells a significant chunk of its output directly to the civilian market. This isn't a small side deal either. We're talking about hundreds of millions of rounds each year. Historically, estimates suggest that nearly half of the plant's small arms production ends up in civilian hands. And what's important to remember is that this isn't some side hustle for them. It's baked into how the system works. Civilian sales help stabilize the entire production ecosystem, especially during peacetime. It creates a kind of balance, where national defense priorities and public access both benefit from the same infrastructure. And this isn't a new development. It actually goes back decades. After the post-Vietnam drawdown, and leading up to the Gulf War era, many of the Army's ammunition facilities had deteriorated to the point where they needed civilian contracts to stay viable. That's when selling to the civilian market became a way to maintain production capacity while generating revenue. It's continued ever since, and it's why a bill like this doesn't just affect the military. It affects all of us. And that's just one part of it. When I kept reading through this bill, another thing jumped out at me. There's a full $1 billion being invested into what they call next-generation ammunition production facilities. That's not just a fancy way of saying build more buildings. What they're talking about is bringing American ammo manufacturing into the 21st century, automated lines, cleaner production systems, and increased efficiency to meet both military demand and, indirectly, the needs of the civilian market. And it doesn't stop there. On top of that, the bill earmarks $2 billion specifically for raw materials, primers, brass, powders, and other bullet components. Now, this might sound a little dry at first, but anyone who remembers what happened in 2020 knows why this is important. The ammo shortage back then wasn't just because people were panic buying. A huge part of it was that producers literally didn't have what they needed to make more bullets. There were massive delays in acquiring primers. Brass was hard to source. Powder supplies were inconsistent. And none of this was helped by the fact that a lot of those materials had to come from overseas. With shipping disruptions and border slowdowns, even suppliers with cash couldn't get what they needed on time. That kind of fragility in the system is what this bill is trying to fix. Manufacturers weren't sitting on their hands. They simply couldn't get the materials fast enough to keep up with demand. That experience left a mark, and it clearly influenced how this new funding was structured. Because by investing billions into securing those materials now, the government is making sure that the supply chain doesn't break down again the next time there's a spike in demand. Whether that's because of political unrest, economic instability, or just a wave of new gun owners like we saw a few years ago. It's a pretty smart move if you ask me. You can have the best machines and most skilled workers, but if you don't have primers or brass, nothing gets out the door. That $2 billion is about creating a buffer, about ensuring we don't get caught flat-footed like last time. And again, while this might look like it's purely a military supply issue on paper, we already know how this works in reality. A huge share of that production eventually lands in gun shops, online retailers, and ranges across the country. It's the same facilities, the same machines, and sometimes even the same product lines. The military gets theirs, but so do we. Another piece tucked into the bill is the $10 million that's being put toward expanding the government's armament workforce. Now, that might seem like a relatively small line item compared to the billions we just talked about, but it plays a key role. Production lines don't run themselves. It takes trained personnel, engineers, machine operators, quality control techs, all working together to scale output. And right now, many of the major ammo plants, like Lake City, are actively hiring. You can literally drive by and see the hiring banners hanging on the fence. This money is helping fill those roles so that all the material and factory upgrades we just talked about don't get bottlenecked by a labor shortage. This entire package, when you look at it together, the $100 million for increased small caliber production, the $1 billion for modern factories, the $2 billion for material acquisition, and the $10 million for labor, is a serious, coordinated effort to make sure the United States can produce ammunition at scale. And again, while the bill uses broad language about defense readiness and strategic supply, we know from decades of precedent that these benefits bleed directly into the civilian market. Let's talk about that. If you're someone who regularly buys ammunition, whether it's for range days, home defense, hunting, or even competitive shooting, you've probably noticed how volatile the prices have been over the past few years. Between pandemic disruptions, political shifts, and global instability, the supply chain for civilian ammo has been stretched thin, prices spiked, popular calibers like 9mm and 5.56 vanished off the shelves, and a lot of smaller gun shops and local ranges struggled to stay stocked. So what happens now with this new surge in investment? It means lower prices, it means more consistent availability, it means that smaller shops, independent retailers, and even private security contractors won't have to scramble just to keep their orders filled. It also means that new gun owners, many of whom came into the fold over the past few years, will have better access to affordable ammunition, which is essential for training and safety. When ammo is affordable and available, people are more likely to get proper instruction. It supports local ranges, instructors, and safety programs. That's not just good policy, it's common sense public safety. It's easy to overlook how critical ammo availability is to exercising your rights. And it's not just about having enough rounds in your safe, it's about the freedom to train regularly, to stay proficient, and to feel confident in your own preparedness. Whether you shoot once a month or a few times a year, availability makes the difference between confidence and compromise. A firearm is only useful if you can feed it, and when the supply dries up, people get nervous. What we're seeing here is a serious attempt to prevent that from happening again. There's another layer to all of this that's worth thinking about. This kind of investment doesn't just impact consumers or retailers, it also shapes the long-term direction of American manufacturing. What we're seeing here is part of a much broader trend to bring critical production capabilities back to U.S. soil. For years, we've outsourced and offshored a lot of our industrial capacity. But when the pandemic hit and global supply chains got disrupted, it became clear how vulnerable that made us. And ammunition, something so basic yet essential, became a symbol of that vulnerability. So now, in 2025, we're seeing a strong pivot. This bill isn't just about more bullets. It's about creating a stable, resilient infrastructure that ensures readiness for any future scenario, whether domestic or international. And by rebuilding that infrastructure here at home, it just so happens that civilian shooters get to benefit too. What's also interesting is the timing. Getting this signed into law right before Independence Day wasn't an accident. Whether you're into politics or not, you can feel the symbolism of it. Ammunition, for many Americans, represents more than just brass and powder. It's about preparedness. It's about responsibility. It's about having the ability to train, to protect, and to stay ready, not in a paranoid way, but in a way that reflects personal freedom. That's why this isn't just another defense bill to shrug off. When half of the small arms ammo produced in government-affiliated plants ends up in civilian hands, every dollar that goes into production eventually ripples out into homes, ranges, classrooms, hunting camps, and competitions across the country. Even if you're not someone who shoots regularly, This kind of move influences the ecosystem around you. Prices, availability, training programs, safety education, they're all downstream from production. And beyond that, it strengthens the entire culture around responsible ownership. From youth marksmanship clubs to veterans training events, having reliable access to ammo helps keep these communities alive and growing. So, when people say this is good news for civilians, they're right. It is, and not just in the obvious ways. It's good for stability, it's good for infrastructure, and it's good for those of us who just want to go buy a box of 5.56 without worrying about whether it'll cost triple what it did last year. Anyway, that's the piece that nobody's really talking about. But maybe they should be. There's a lot in this bill. But this part, the part that boosts production, strengthens supply, and flows into the civilian market, might end up being one of the most impactful.